As the van bumped through the desert, I began to wonder, is this hike going to be more difficult than I anticipated? The van came to a halt, and it was time to begin our journey. I started towards the front of the group, determined, like a few others, to follow close behind our guide through the rugged terrain. Quickly, I realized that it would prove to be more challenging than I expected. Our leader was a large, burly man who knew the migrant trails like the back of his hand. While he took calm strides, whisking around the thorn bushes with ease, I quickly became lost in the bumpy turns and prickly shrubs of the dry landscape. Barely a minute into the excursion, the rest of the group was lost behind us, and numerous times we stopped to wait for the others. Even once we regained our distance and met up with the guide again, in seconds, we were once again left behind, hobbling through the vegetation, trying to catch up. All the while, I felt the overbearing presence of being watched. Over the wall was a border patrol station with cameras able to see the color of my eyes from afar. Not only were there eyes on us, but coyotes, the members of the cartel who smuggled the migrants, were simultaneously observing us. By the time we were just ahead of the border wall, my legs had been scraped and pricked, and my arms and hair were well acquainted with the sharp spines of the thicket. As I sank across the small dunes, I looked up in both awe and disgust at the looming metal wall in front of me. I watched as others approached the wall, shrinking in comparison to the gigantic metal barrier. Seeing the might of this 30-foot wall, I truly grasped the desperation many migrants faced. In just a minute, men, women, and children, having just crossed the desert, had to scale this wall in the dark of the night. This wall, which acted as a hindrance to both people and nature, was designed to kill. Just out of sight were the Border Patrol agents on the other side, simply waiting for the sensors on the bottom of the wall to alert them that they could chase after those who crossed the wall, and if they deemed necessary, put their deadly rifles to use. As I stared at the wall that overshadowed the highest mountains and left a red stain on the earth, I was overwhelmed by the lengths humans go to turn their hatred into reality. How could someone design a wall at the exact height it would take to kill someone if they fall? Why were U.S. agents shooting across the border into Mexico to put holes in the barrels of water left out for the dehydrated, dying migrants? How have we gone so long allowing our tax dollars to fund a deadly barrier and bullets in the backs of human beings? And how did I ever believe that my reposts of activism on social media were ever enough contribution to stop this? I am filled with so much frustration and rage, and yet I haven't given up. In fact, after this trip, I've also been filled with hope for a future without borders. Birds and butterflies have become a symbol of this hope as they continue their migration over the walls. Our guide taught us that each monsoon season, the flowing flash floods tear down parts of the wall. Through these glimpses of hope, I am aware that nature will win. God's earth, a land not intended for borders and walls dividing God's creation, will be united.
Over the course of the trip, we had heavily interacted with one fact. Many migrants die crossing the Sonoran Desert. This fact was unavoidable. The border wall, designed specifically to harm and kill migrants trying to cross, is one of Agua Prieta's most central pieces of architecture. There's hardly anywhere you can go in the town or the surrounding state and not see at least part of the wall. Despite this, the grim reality of what migrants experience while crossing was still abstract. It was visible and imposing, but I still felt distant from it. Some events and moments throughout the trip helped to narrow that disconnect. One such moment was the vigil we participated in on Tuesday evening, in which we presented crosses engraved with the names of migrants who had died, alongside others for those who were unidentified. The unnamed crosses were the ones that held the most impact for me. It forced us to reckon with the fact that there were migrants whose identities were completely lost, their lives reduced to the words, "no identificada." However, despite this growing sense of closeness, I still felt a lingering sense of detachment. The crosses we held and names we announced were real, but we were still, in essence, acknowledging and mourning migrants as a collective, not as individual persons. Their suffering was present, but it wasn't personal. That changed for me towards the end of the week when the BWAP team participated in a cross-planning ceremony. The ceremony blended elements of traditional indigenous practices and modern Christian ones to commemorate Juan de Jesus Garcia, a young migrant who died after crossing the border. The cross we planted was engraved with his name, date of death, and painted red to indicate him as a male. Yet what struck me most was not the color of the cross, but the small number 16 carved at the top. Juan was only 16 years old when he died. That one detail was what shattered any remaining emotional distance. No longer were we just commemorating many migrants who have died in the Sonoran Desert, we were mourning a child. More than that, when Juan died, he was only 2 years older than me. Now at his cross, I had surpassed him in age. The ceremony was deeply intentional. We began by digging a hole for the cross, a process too reminiscent of digging a grave. We laid out an altar with various indigenous spiritual objects and lit incense, asking the wind to carry the scent to Juan's family as a means of comfort. We offered prayers for him, and to end the ceremony, we moved around the circle one by one and touched the cross, leaving something of ourselves with Juan. Each part of the ceremony was so overwhelmingly physical that it was impossible not to recognize it as a funeral. Every gesture was one of remembrance and grief, and acknowledgement that Juan's life mattered and that he had not been forgotten. Before leaving the site, we cemented the cross into place, leaving a stone altar around it. The cross isn't going anywhere. It will stand as a permanent marker of Juan's life and death. Every passerby will see it, and whether they know it or not, be confronted with a grave of a child who died as a result of our government. In a world where migrants and their suffering are so often ignored, this cross offers a lasting recognition. It ensures that Juan de Jesus Garcia is remembered not as a statistic, but as a child whose life was cut far too short by a border that renders so many deaths invisible.
Loving others is not easy. But on this trip, I was inspired to recommit myself to the practice of loving others. We experienced some powerful examples of love on this trip, and I'm going to share some of them with you today. To introduce the first one, I'll tell you a story from Scripture. In Mark chapter 3, Jesus was in the synagogue on the Sabbath when he saw a man with a withered hand. Jesus knew that there were people watching him who wanted to catch him healing the man so that they could accuse him of breaking the Sabbath. Yet Jesus did it anyway. During our time in Douglas, a pastor recounted a time where someone saw some migrants on the side of the road that needed aid. He wanted to help, but his family was in the car with him, and he knew the potential consequences. There was immense risk. Simply giving undocumented migrants a ride could result in heavy fines and years in prison. Yet he still tried to help. He tried to love his neighbor. Here's another example. Frontera de Cristo has been hosting a prayer vigil every Tuesday for more than a decade to mourn for migrants who have lost their lives in the desert. Through this vigil, I was reminded that I can express love through grief, even for people I have not and will never meet. Each of the people represented by the crosses held dreams, hopes, ambitions, family, friends, and although I will never know their exact journey, I can still love them by grieving them. For their journey never completed, their dreams never fulfilled, for the families or friends never met again, for their stories and histories never told, and for their deaths. A final example of love came from someone who showed strength even when they were afraid. A local volunteer recalled how she stood up to a threatening person who was trying to take migrants away from shelter and into harm's way. This threatening person did it because of direct orders from their boss, who was a powerful man in the community. However, despite her fear, she stood proudly and confidently between the threat and the migrants, keeping them safe. To me, this was an immense act of love. These examples of love challenged me to recommit myself to loving others, with radical care and aid, with compassionate grief, and with strength. Even when I am afraid, I hope they will do the same for you.